Welcome everyone to Enterprise Knowledge's first webinar in our Semantic Layer webinar series. I am Adam El-Tarhouni, Senior Consultant at Enterprise Knowledge, and today we are joined by two of my colleagues, Lulit Tesfaye, Vice President of Knowledge and Data Services, and Sara Nash, Principal Consultant, to talk about defining the semantic layer. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and shared after the event is over. We're also going to save time at the end of the presentation to answer a few questions, so feel free to enter them in the chat as we go along. We have a lot of material to cover, so we're just going to kick this off right away. And with that being said, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Lulit and Sara.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at the start of your week. If you are in the US, I know we're coming up a holiday. As Adam called out, my name is Lulit. I'm a partner here at EK. And Enterprise Knowledge, for those of you who may be new to us, we are a consultancy based just outside of Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia. We specialize in knowledge, information, data management, strategy, design, implementation, consulting. That really makes us the largest firm dedicated to this space. So we are excited today to speak with you about the experience we have working on different projects, specifically within the semantics space, across different industries. I personally have been in data and or doing something with data as a consumer or as in the space for over 15 years. And with Sara, I think we've worked on at least 20 or 30 projects together. So since 2018, I believe. So we're excited to be here to share that experience. Sara, over to you.
Great, thank you, Lulit, and nice to be with you all. My name is Sara Nash. I'm a principal consultant in our semantic engineering practice at EK. As Lulit said, I've been with EK since 2018, and over that time have helped organizations on various parts of their semantic layer development. So I've worked with organizations who are defining their first ontology or building out a knowledge graph pilot, and also have helped organizations with their kind of like strategic semantic layer initiatives, and all the kind of surrounding applications that that can make semantic layers, or that really are kind of driven by semantic layers, such as recommendation engines, chatbots, advanced analytics platforms, and search. And so really excited to share some of those stories today, but also more importantly, give kind of practical frameworks and advice on how you can apply these techniques at your organizations. So I think with that, we'll jump right into it.
Awesome. And I know Adam mentioned we'll answer questions in the end, but if you have any questions, type them in the question box. We will pick them up as we go to make sure that we're addressing them throughout. So with that, I always like to start, thinking around why are we talking about a semantic layer before we define what is a semantic layer. Depending on what industry where you're coming from, I think for most of us, especially within the technology space, over the past 10 or so years, the last 2 decades, I would say, I think we've gone through some successful, some painful migrations of, content, information, data from content management systems, from data management systems to data lakes, the data warehouse, and now recently to cloud. And what we are realizing at the end of it all is that moving data physically from one location and having it co-located in one place is really not answering the questions that you're seeing here in front of your screen on the left. The challenge of how do I know this data set is related to this content item that I have, even within the same data lake or data lake house or data warehouse? What data am I missing? How do I understand the meaning of this data? The questions that are really hard to interpret, especially when you're thinking about the biggest driver, the world that we live in right now with generative AI. The biggest challenge remains about the understanding of data. So when we talk about the semantic layer, and I'll define that on the next slide, we are not talking about physically co-locating data in one place, but having an understanding and a meaning of data. So what does that mean? If we go to the next slide, the definition of a semantic layer is not new. For most of us, we touch it, we have it. I would say 9 out of 10 times what we talk about today, you would have it within your organization. The way we define, and this is the only time I'm going to read from this slide, is that a semantic layer is that standardized framework that allows us to organize and abstract organizational knowledge and data. And when we say data, we're talking about structured, unstructured, semi-structured, your webinars, your videos, your PDFs with your tabular data, and serves as that connecting layer. So what it does is, for structured data, it allows us to contextualize knowledge and capture tacit knowledge. For unstructured data, it allows us to organize it and label it and categorize it so that it is machine readable. And then for overall the full data ecosystem, it allows us to connect and aggregate it without having to move data physically from one place to the other. So what that means is the data about data, or descriptive data, is the first class citizen, and that being metadata, and Sarah will get into the specific components of that. So the key takeaway here is that, I think Gartner dubbed this a data fabric layer back in 2021 timeframe, end of 2020. It's not something different or something new. It's the data fabric layer is more focused on the data angle. When we talk about a semantic layer, it's kind of all of the knowledge assets within your organization. It's what allows us to connect it, pull it together, organize it, and aggregate it. And we'll get into that when passing it over to Sarah to walk us through.
Excellent, thanks, Lulit. So what we're going to do is dive into each of these components, and I want to start by saying that the expectation is not that there's any one place to start, and so depending on the kinds of questions that your organization is looking to ask of your knowledge assets, that's really where you want to start in terms of building out your semantic layer. I would say from kind of personal experience, I worked with organizations that had very different entry points. There was one healthcare training organization that wanted to understand, what courses do we have about ACL injuries, or what are the competencies that a nurse working in Arkansas who's in a skilled nursing facility needs to have. And in order to answer those kinds of questions, they needed to understand more kind of topically about their content, as well as kind of like dive into the core descriptors of their organization, like who are the people that they, what are their different customer types, what are the different, healthcare topics. And so they started with taxonomy as a kind of entry point into their semantic layer. For other organizations, working with a pharmaceutical company, they were looking to ask more structured information about their data that was captured in different types of experiment, product development systems. And so they started with metadata. So we're going to dive into each of these components, but just really want to start with the expectation that this isn't a progression of, starting here, going to there. Your organization has, different variations of this content that they can build at already. So starting with metadata. Metadata is core to kind of describing really the data about your knowledge assets. And I'm going to use knowledge assets or organization assets kind of interchangeably throughout the organization, throughout this presentation, I mean. But it's an important point around defining the semantic layer is that it can apply to not just data, not just content, not just your products. It's really something that can provide context and connectivity across many different types of assets. So when we think about data fabric, we might be speaking more specifically to data, and so I'm a little bit more expansive here with knowledge assets, because it's gonna, semantic layer covers across all of that. But starting with metadata, so metadata is the data about your knowledge assets, and it's really core to cataloging and finding and governing the information that you have at your organization. Metadata is something that is inherent in a lot of enterprise systems. So the different types of metadata that you'll encounter are administrative or system generated metadata, and that's really inherent in most of our information systems. But where you get more value of the semantics or meaning is when you get into descriptive and contextual metadata about your information. So the kinds of questions that you can answer with metadata are, what data do we have about our products? Where product is a metadata that you could describe different data sets with. If you wanted to, retrieve product images about marketing campaigns, that's metadata that you would have applied to your, your marketing campaigns to be able to quickly retrieve that. And so, metadata is, many organizations face a challenge where they're just using the built-in metadata, meaning they are leveraging system generated information like, just date created or things like that, and don't have kind of a strategy around how they're trying to describe their knowledge assets kind of when they're being captured. And so, the important thing there is really thinking more strategically around what are the kinds of things that your business would be looking to search or filter on or build reports on, and that having kind of a more strategic outlook on the creation of this. But this is super foundational for the semantic layer, and it's the kind of capability that enables you connectivity across your ecosystem. So if you have shared, if you're in one system describing products, another system describing customers, and you have metadata about each of those things in those respective systems, through the semantic layer and through the metadata component, you can connect those and say that those are related because of that shared information.
And Sarah, if I can add in here, a good example here is the federal financial regulator that we are currently working with that has developed their strategic overview, of like for data and for AI over the next 2 to 3 years. And they're the primary starting place we're helping them with is understanding what data that they have across the different business units. There's 10 or 12 organizations within this financial regulator that either interacts with external financial institutions by publishing data or consuming data, produces some reports. So on a given topic, many of their organizations share certain types of data. So understanding and cataloging the type of data that they have identified as kind of that foundational step towards their semantic layer overarching longer term goals, and we'll talk about that. But for Sarah called out that it's not necessarily you can start here or go somewhere else, or that this is a requirement to start, but this is the lowest hanging place to start, meaning many systems produce metadata. You would be able to describe your data by developing your business metadata and cataloging that. And the solutions here are data catalogs, product management, information management systems, master data management. These are all solutions that you can leverage to help you understand what data that you have and catalog and organize it in such a way that you can now have it ready to be used for different use cases, fit for purpose use. I think one thing to call out here is when you are going through the metadata organization cataloging process, the next component is going to come into play, as it will help you define what goes in your category of metadata. So for the example that I gave, the financial institution, the regulator, they're using metadata kind of as by cataloging it as their directory to their mole of data that they have. I know moles are becoming a thing of the past, but that would be the analogy that I would use, is this is kind of your directory to what kind of data that you have.
Absolutely, that's spot on, Lulit, and I think that provides us a good intro to the next core component that really goes hand in hand with metadata, which is your business glossary. And I would say business glossaries are somewhat surprisingly the most challenging to achieve as an organization, but also provide the most value, and they're the least technically advanced of any of the components of a semantic layer. But it can be really hard to get shared definitions at an organization for strategic concepts. So your business glossary allows you to answer questions like, how do we define profitability for the product area? Or when we say customer journey, what does that truly mean from both the definition perspective, but also from, what is it made up of? The last example here around, what is the agreed definition of certain KPIs? So if you think to your organization, what are some of the, I would say, like biggest buzzwords or core, concepts that appear in every presentation and every report? Are you confident that everyone at the organization is considering that from the same perspective, or is there kind of variation in how people are doing? And that can have pretty big impacts. If there's different definitions around something like profitability, you would have pretty skewed reporting and could be making some strategic decisions that aren't consistent. So, I share one story, which is at a kickoff meeting for an organization. We were working with a consultancy who does a lot of, strategy on product management, and they wanted to have a kind of shared model of how they were managing their products. And we asked at the kickoff meeting, like, how do you define a product? Or, and we had over 30 leaders from around the organization, and I would say probably 5 or 6 different congealing around some like 5 or 6 definitions of what a product meant, and the kinds of questions that they're asking around, are we talking about a single SKU, or are we talking about a product family? Is it just hardware products? Are we also thinking about software and services? And those kinds of nuances are inescapable. They really have them at every organization. But through a business glossary, what you can get is some alignment around, even if there are variations about different product types, like naming those and defining those as such. The things that helps with is onboarding. When you have people who are coming from outside your organization, they can come up to speed more quickly on how the meaning behind the information that they're interacting with, and then of course consistent reporting and kind of confidence in the information that you're finding. So yeah, business glossaries, as Lulit mentioned, in terms of where they manifest, you'll see them in data catalogs or taxonomy management systems or other kinds of, those are some of the core sets. It could even be in your intranet, but super important to the overall semantic layer.
Yeah, and one thing, an interesting trend that we are seeing recently is this request for shared language or shared meaning and definition is actually coming from, it used to be from the library side, the content side of the world, but recently we're seeing this coming from the data and analytics team. To give you an example, for a retailer that we're working with, their data and analytics team pulls this different data sets and to produce dashboards for their C-level executives on reports on revenue, store health, different components that they produce metrics and analytics on. And they started seeing this discrepancies in their data because the one side of the arm of the organization defines revenue a certain way. Think HR, for instance, versus the corporate office versus the stores and the different locations and even the department within the data analytics team that they have. So it's the same data, but because they were not on the same page about how they're interpreting revenue, the concept of revenue, they were getting skewed different, erroneous data at the end of the day. So this is where we are now seeing this shift of, how do we get aligned that our data team is working on the right data and producing the right numbers based on shared meaning of what we mean when we say profitability, revenue, KPI, product, market share. These are the most repeated concepts that we're seeing now, especially when it comes to analyzing data. And we'll come to this, the biggest driver, training AI, training machine learning algorithms about what we mean when we define these content and data items.
Awesome. So, we've talked through metadata and business glossary as being core components of your semantic layer, and next we're going to dive into something that historically has really been driven, brings semantics to life, which is taxonomy. And what taxonomy allows us to do is manages two realities that we haven't covered yet. One is that many people say the same thing or say different things but mean the same thing, and the second reality is that we like to describe things at different levels of grain. In certain situations we're talking very granularly, but when we're seeing reports or when we're doing filters, we want kind of various levels of aggregation. And so taxonomy is a kind of specialized type of metadata that specifically works in kind of descriptive and contextual contexts, and for those purposes to provide core, the controlled vocabularies or the kind of descriptors of how you want to categorize your information in the business. So the kinds of questions that we can answer through taxonomy is, what products fall under a particular product category, or even in the first place, what are all the products that we have at our organization and how do they fall into different product categories? How do we better kind of organize our product content to serve, for our customer service processes? So what are the different, how can we better categorize data so that we can bring it at the right point of need? And so how this works in action is basically organizations can describe their core concepts. So you think through, what are the things that you need to define during your business glossary, that might prompt the, what would be really valuable to have a taxonomy for. So not only do you have, this is what our definition of product means at the organization, but also this is a list of products that multiple different enterprise systems can use to consistently categorize their information and connect their information. Another, I would say, a prompt for driving taxonomy design is when you think about the metadata that you're looking to capture, it's really valuable to have kind of a controlled vocabulary or something that someone is not writing out their own interpretation of what the field is, but those kinds of drop downs are really helpful to get consistent data and kind of categorization across the organization. So taxonomies allow you to define that controlled vocabulary and then also embed it with additional meaning, your synonyms, and the hierarchy that will help you answer these kinds of questions. And I'm currently working with a large financial institution who is using taxonomy as a strategic tool to create a more data-driven risk management process. And so what they've done is define all of the they've gone from describing risks in sort of a free-form way where they have over 20,000 risk descriptions of various different risks, and you can't gain any insights around what are the patterns of our risks across the firm. Are there any things that we need to be placing more attention to? How do we know what lines of business or what products some of these risks are related to? And when a regulatory matter comes up, it's difficult to pull together reports, kind of historic reports on risks. And so what we're doing is basically defining out all of the taxonomies to help consistently categorize and describe that risk data. So things like their products, their business units, the legal entities, even the types of risks or the types of impacts of those risks, and creating just a more consistent way of describing that. And it's already really yielding insights around creating over 45% deduplication across all of these different risk descriptions that they previously weren't able to get insights from.
Yeah. And Sarah, I think this actually touches on the question that is posted in the comments, which is how do you expand metadata, especially for unstructured content? This is where taxonomy is very powerful in terms of not only allowing you to structure unstructured data using aligned terminologies, but also allowing the end user to navigate your content and your data in a way that makes sense, making it more intuitive. And I think we are all familiar with the Amazon experience. If you're searching for a TV or a cell phone, there are parameters that you filter by, that navigation and browsing. That's all taxonomy. Whereas when it comes to expanding metadata, one good example here is a biopharmaceutical company that we work with that provides medical products on their website, and they have over 70,000 product categories where their product information management system houses this data, this taxonomy. However, over time, it has kind of gotten unwieldy, and now they're reaching a point where the size of it is unmanageable at this point, whereas they also have a lot of content that's product related content they want to align with product data. So the tools and solutions now, especially with large language models and entity recognition, extraction of text, unstructured data we are able to manage unstructured data better by analyzing it, generalizing it, and extracting topics and taxonomies so that you can expand your metadata, especially the vocabularies that go and describe your metadata, and specifically around, a specific thing, right? If it's a product, if it's a skill, if it is a location is actually easier. Typically, it's the aboutness of something that taxonomy allows you to align on. And the great thing, I think, is not everyone needs to be on the same page thanks to technology these days. You don't need to fight over, we're going to call this thing only and nothing else. Now solutions allow us to describe things in different ways using alternate labels, substitute forms, and different ways of describing it. Of course, you will define what your primary label of something is for your taxonomy, but we're reaching to a point where if an organization can align at the enterprise level on the 5 or 7 things that are shared across the organization, like location, department, things that you don't need to disagree on. The others, there are ways to manage them at the department level, at the localized level. So there are ways that solutions and tools are now allowing us to manage metadata and expand the taxonomies into this hierarchical relationships better.
Yeah, that's great, Lulit. And I can give the example with the financial services, kind of the build out of that network of taxonomy that's revamping how they're doing their risk management. We used all of those risk descriptions, but you could say a similar case for product descriptions to see, what are the consistencies or the patterns across those. And we found through natural language analysis that everyone was describing impacts, and a lot of the impacts of risk could kind of boil up to a couple of different things, but we were able to do that through that free text analysis. So you always want the unstructured data. I think sometimes it's demonized when we're kind of in this kind of wanting to get structure out of unstructured data, but it's actually really helpful in terms of giving us the clues in terms of what's important to people to help bring more structure and consistency to those. So definitely worth taking advantage of. So I want to build next from taxonomy and information architecture to ontology, where so with taxonomy, and you'll see this example on the bottom left-hand side, we have controlled vocabularies and hierarchy between things is the kind of structure around that. And what ontology allows us to do is map and contextualize further beyond just hierarchical relationships. So ontologies help us manage the reality that not everything is in a hierarchy, and that there's important relationships or mapping across the organization. So the kinds of questions that we can answer via ontology look like, how can we get a unified understanding of product data across different departments? Is the meaning of products across sales and marketing, customer service, each of those might have a different kind of structuring of their products. The other example that can really help with ontologies is helping to map out your supply chain processes or your product development processes. What's the core data that you map, kind of manage across that way, and how can you relate it across systems and support aggregation? So now, in terms of what ontology actually is, ontology is a schema or a data model that helps you define the core entities at your organization and how they relate to each other. And so you can see in the bottom left-hand side, for this example, we see that products and customers and sales and regions are all core information. It could be the actual data behind this could be a taxonomy, or it could be some of your data or content assets, or it could be metadata from a a product information management system or something like that. But what your ontology allows you to do is take, how do these core concepts relate to each other? And so, for example, products can relate to customers, and also products have sales. And so we might be able to see through this how, infer, where are our products being sold based on the relationship through customers and regions. So ontologies are enable us inference and insights in that way, as well as kind of physically mapping out your business in a more machine readable way. And Lulit, I think you have a story here on how ontologies have come to life at one of our clients.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you are calling out here, Sarah, is that you can stop at taxonomies, you can stop metadata, business glossaries. Ontologies are just another tool that would allow you to further that understanding of relationship of data. And a very good example here, one client came to us with, they're in a commercial real estate space. Their challenge was that one of their sales representatives offered an existing customer a property that they already owned. And as you would imagine, the challenge for them here was that they did not have a way of seeing quickly the data related to a customer, the type of property and products that they have, the representatives, the sales representatives that have supported them in the past. So all these relationships that are kind of buried within either our tabular data or unstructured content is where ontologies come into play to help us understand, when we say a customer, what are the things that are related to a customer? What products do they own? What services do they have? What sales representatives do we have that have supported them in the past? What conversations have we had? So in a way, you are mapping the relationship of the same entity that naturally lives in your sales department, in your products department, in your CRM, in different solutions. Earlier, I talked about that pharmaceutical products provider. Carrying on that example with their 70,000 products, the biggest challenge was, one, how do we shrink that data for duplicates and deduplicate that? We leveraged some AI in support of organizing that, but we also leveraged ontologies. So their story is they have users, even their own internal marketing team, that would go to Google to search for their product and look at that nice knowledge panel that gives us the things that are related to a product. If you search for anything right now, or even a person, it gives you that knowledge panel saying these are the things that are related to this product. What an ontology allowed that organization to do is connect a product with the research paper that was published around that product from universities or research institutes, marketing materials, learning content, product installment guide, how-to videos, all these things that you would imagine live in very siloed systems. So an ontology allowed them to explicitly say, this thing is related to this thing this way, right? This product has this video. And this is something that we naturally know as humans, but it's not so easy for machines to understand unless you can encode it to them. And that's what an ontology allows you to do, is semantically contextualize and connect the stuff that you have in different places without having to physically move it by just using metadata.
That's great. And I think, Lulit, that brings us nicely into the last component of our semantic layer, which is your knowledge graph. And so what a knowledge graph is it basically brings that schema, or the way that you want to relate your kind of core content or information, and puts the data behind it to enable things like inference or recommendations, or even just aggregation and connectivity across your organization. So with a knowledge graph, what this allows you to do is say, within your ontology, you've said, products are purchased by customers and customers live in a certain region. It gives you that map, but it doesn't allow you to answer that question of, what were the most purchased products in, across any of the customers that we had in a particular region. So yeah, knowledge graphs are basically bringing that schema to life across your content and data. One of the key value points of a knowledge graph is that it can work with unstructured data, content, information, your products, your data, and provide that connected map across the organization. And knowledge graphs are, and we're going to get into this in a moment in terms of the architecture, but are really that kind of foundational layer that different applications can be built upon. So, a recommendation engine or a search engine will integrate directly with your knowledge graph, where you've built that machine readable map of your context across the organization. This graph can provide those kinds of use cases for many different downstream use cases. So with the actual contents of your graph, it might be bringing together your taxonomies, the metadata really is kind of a aggregation point across all of the components that we've talked through around the semantic layer into this kind of database. But this is where a lot of those semantic components are really connected out to your content and information.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, it's important to call out when we are starting down, an engagement down a path. One of the questions we ask is, what are your use cases? What are the challenges that you're looking to solve? And as you would imagine, it's kind of like a card sorting exercise, right? There are things that could be handled at the metadata level. What metadata do you have? The questions that Sarah talked about, the basic, where do we find this type of data? That kind of question, we try to categorize them, and the majority use cases, as you would pick up from the questions that fall in the graph category, are the ones that are somewhat a little sophisticated and are looking for 3, 4, 5 types of data sources and bringing them together and doing some sort of analytics on, or being able to ask natural language questions over structured data. These were the supply chain use cases. ESG, the environmental sustainability governance space, is where we're seeing a lot of these use cases, where we're doing graph analytics or the need to create a graph layer from your ontology. And I'll give you an example. In order to answer a question for one of the big 4 consulting companies that we're partnering with, their question was around supply chain that touched across multiple components of the work that they do to advise their clients. What they were looking to prove was how do we reduce our carbon footprint based on the type of material we use to manufacture something, the type of packaging that we use to package the product, and then ship it, which way, the medium we use to ship it. In order to answer these 3 questions, as you would imagine, you would need the ability to, be it is your machine learning algorithms or just your data analytics team, they need a way to relate and make machine readable how these data components or concepts are related. And that's where a knowledge graph comes into play, because it allows you to actually instantiate that ontological relationship that we saw earlier onto your data and store it as a graph. This could be in the semantic web space as triples, RDF based, or it could be labeled property graph if we're more focused on entity and properties. So it gives you the tool to store your data with context. That's what a graph does with either the relationships, subject, predicate, object in the RDF space, or as properties that are related in their attributes and how they are connected with one another. So it's a very powerful tool for doing advanced analytics, especially for giving AI the context it needs to understand where this thing came from, lineage and explainability.
That's spot on, Lulit. And I think we have a question here around the talking about some of the tools that will enable this. So aligning metadata fields to your departments and your BUs and countries. And so I think that brings us nicely to, how do you actually realize this semantic layer architecture? So why don't you bring us into that?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great segue. So I think it's important to speak to the concept that there are many tools in this space, and as we are evolving in maturity and advancement, the industry is also evolving as well. That said, I think the best way to describe, if you go to the next slide, we have a very simplified visual that helps us picture where a semantic layer sits within our typical organizational architecture or solutions architecture. And I think the key thing that I would call out here is that the ability to abstract and sit as a layer within and interact with your multiple systems. And I've been saying this earlier too, this is not about moving data physically. This is about focusing on metadata and anything that gives us a descriptive attribute to your existing data, taxonomies, ontologies, and graph solutions. So this is a very simplified architecture. And one thing that is implied, maybe not called out on this architecture, is it's about interoperability. What that means is because of the changes within our industry, a lot of organizations are trying to protect their data from being vendor locked. What that means is, as we are becoming globalized, data is also becoming globalized, and the ability to share data is becoming a key priority for many organizations, for many CDOs, for many CTOs, with, of course, security in mind. So that ability to protect your data by abstracting it and modeling it in such a way that you can interact with your systems of today and tomorrow is the key aspect of this. And to touch on the questions, there is really no right or wrong way of doing this. For many of our projects, if I look across the work that we've done to date, I think we've done over 50 or so projects at this point, specifically on this. 9 out of 10 times, these components exist within your organization. It's just architecting it in a different way, or enriching your data with more metadata, or contextualizing your structured data with more metadata or taxonomies. These are the types of engagements that are building up to a semantic layer. We partner with a lot of the matured vendors in this space, from graph databases to data catalogs, master data management. Across the board, the key thing as you're thinking through this type of architecture to ask is, what level of scale are you looking for? What are your use cases? Because there are some tools already, like your content management system, for instance, or your customer CRM relationship management system. They have capabilities to manage metadata in some taxonomies. So a lot of the time we look at, what do you already have within your organization? How do you standardize this contextual information within those systems? And where do you store the source of truth for many of the shared, at a high level, the shared components? These are the questions that we would ask as you're exploring these different components. You don't need all of them. Majority of them already exist within, even the data lakes have some capabilities to manage metadata. The Databricks, Snowflake are those that we work with, but it's about getting alignment around what is that architecture that you're looking for that would allow you to abstract that contextual information, your knowledge assets, from these different systems. Some organizations that are at a higher maturity spectrum or mid-range leverage taxonomy ontology management solutions that kind of push out these standardized taxonomies, ontologies, metadata, and then different departments use whatever they need from that. This is one approach we used at a bank that we supported, where they just standardize the core things that their 15 or 18 departments need across the board, between their loans department versus their banking department versus their insurance department, components that are shared, customer, location, account number, the core things that you need to standardize. You can standardize kind of at a central level and then federate the rest based on this architecture, that simplified architecture that you see in front of you. So I think it's important to call this out. It is very exciting to see the industry, especially the vendor space, getting behind the value of semantic layer. That's what we've seen, especially after the last 2 years, thanks to the developments in the AI space. And the key drivers here are, how do we aggregate data in one place? How do we contextualize it so that AI understands what we mean? And then how do we enable explainability for machine learning and training data? This is the data side of the world. The unstructured and knowledge part of the world has always needed that information also to make any meaningful decisions within the organization. So at the end of the day, we are seeing that line blur between structured, semi-structured, unstructured, historically hypothetical debate that we have had in the past. But I would say also we are seeing some components within industry, some products that are coming out that are realizing the value of this and pushing or purporting to have a semantic layer. So we do want to debunk this, from the beginning. If you go to our website, our core belief and approach to consulting is our thought leadership. We have over 500 content items that's free of charge, or no emails required, that you can access anytime. So I encourage you to do that. But on top of that, I think the few things that you see on the screen is, if you must take away anything from today's conversation, a semantic layer is not a single product. As I mentioned, you have most of these solutions in-house. It's just a different perspective and architecting it in the way that serves your purpose. The other piece is, it's not just a graph or a knowledge graph, because as you saw, the different components feed into that larger abstraction layer of a graph. And the other piece that I would call out is if someone comes to you and says, I can automate all of the generation of your semantic layer, run away. Because the whole point of semantics is about understanding your organization, and you are the experts in your organization. So the key here is leveraging AI to augment some of the mundane tasks of extracting text, especially from unstructured data, but you always need human in the loop to help AI understand what you mean when you say revenue as a bank versus revenue as a coffee company. So it's important to have that human in the loop as well.
Absolutely, and I love the question in the chat too around thinking that a semantic layer is a whole separate thing, but you know, as we've talked about, it's a method or framework for connecting things like your glossary, your metadata, your taxonomy, your ontology, and your knowledge graph, and you know, taking the components that you need and maybe leaving some of them behind. But yeah, that's a really important point, that you know, the semantic layer is not something that's completely new that requires you to buy a new tool or to, you know, stand up a whole separate design department. There's a lot of what you already have can be leveraged for this. So want to talk through next how to get started, and first on this point, you know, you already have things likely at your organization that you can leverage. So you're certainly not starting with a blank slate. But as you're interested to build out your semantic layer capabilities to get, you know, connectivity across multiple different systems, get connectivity across domains, maybe enable some of the kinds of applications that require context with your data, things like recommendation engines or question answering of generative AI. We really recommend starting with a small, like, proof of concept or an MVP that isn't, you know, first buying a new tool, but it's thinking through, you know, what are the use cases that I'm trying to prove. You know, we've talked through a number of business questions that can be answered or facilitated by the semantic layer. What are those questions for you? What are the things that might be keeping your leadership up at night that would require many months to cobble together data or information to be able to answer them? Those are the strategic questions to start with. So, you know, as we see the, it's often, I think, and maybe many of you on the call can relate to this, we get really excited about the kind of technical concepts behind this, the you know, opportunities, then the kind of the standards and being able to leverage semantics, and there's such great value in that. But we find that for across the organization, you know, leading with you can do this cool thing with technology or taxonomy, or you can do this cool thing with ontology, won't really you know, catch the attention of the people that you're trying to partner with on the business side. And so really focusing on what are the questions that you want to answer and proving out those kinds of use cases will help build momentum for the kind of greater semantic layer development at hand. So, you know, start with those questions, start with kind of getting engagement across multiple areas of the business, and iteratively build out the components that we've talked through here.
And Sarah, I think it's important to call out to kind of, we leverage this two-track model when we're engaging in these types of engagements, especially for larger, more mature organizations, where we start small, to Sarah's point, with prototyping, showing the value quickly. And when we say quickly, we're thinking in terms of 8 to 10 to 12 weeks, because things change a lot and things move fast a lot. So you want to be able to maintain that momentum and even show that this works, that you have the right questions you're looking to answer with your semantic solution. In parallel, though, we're also discussing how this is going to scale. What is the larger term strategy? Back in the days, it used to be 3 to 5 years. Now that's 12 to 18 months, because the world changes pretty fast, and we're seeing that shrink too. Is helping organizations determine what are the tools, the architecture that you need, putting this together, but also what's your implementation roadmap? What do you do next? What do you do soon? What do you do later? I think there's a lot of power in bringing your organization in thinking in that way as you're building that quick prototype and showing that initial foundation of here's how it would look, especially because it could be esoteric when it's not clickable, right? So it's important to give that visibility into what it could do.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of think through, there are a couple of different entry points that we recommend that help organizations kickstart in this effort, whether it's, you know, kickstart a design effort or kickstart, you know, what do we currently have that we can help kind of get more value from. And so there's really kind of three different tracks that we work on with clients typically. The first was what we were just talking through around building out an MVP or a POC of a semantic solution. We have one specifically that targets LLM, so a semantic LLM accelerator that helps build out your semantic layer with some of your existing components and integrates how that semantic layer can help power and improve the quality and reliability of responses from LLMs. We also have workshops that bring together all of the parties that are involved in building out a semantic layer. I think one of both the power from a technology standpoint, but also from kind of an organizational impact of semantic layers is it really brings together technology and domain expertise and data and content, these parts of the organization that might have historically not always been kind of speaking the same language. And so having a 2-day workshop to pull together all of those folks and get to kind of an approach and roadmap that to build out your semantic layer is a great way to kickstart that. And then lastly, there's opportunities to train out the folks at your organization to, you know, understand these core concepts and like the technical skills required to build out semantic layers, whether that's the foundations of taxonomy design and ontology design, graph engineering, or even how to define use cases in the semantic layer space. So we also have kind of training programs on that. All of the information on these and other work that we have in the semantic layer space are available on our website. So happy to talk through any of those. But next want to turn to, as we're closing out here, what some of the enterprise use cases are in this space. And when in a couple of weeks from now, we're going to be having a follow-on webinar called the Semantic Layer Real Stories and Case Studies. We're going to be diving into further kind of use cases and kind of the impact of those use cases across these. And so I'm going to send out a poll as we're wrapping up here for what of these use cases and that you would like to hear about, particularly from that webinar. And Lulit, while I set that up, do you want to talk through some of these use cases as we're closing out?
Yeah, I know we have 1 minute left, but to Sarah's point, I think the biggest way we learn is when we share experience and learn from what others have done well, or where we have failed, or where we have stumbled. So what you see in front of you are the high-level summaries of the different projects that we've done. There is more detail to behind these, but we just structured it to this 5 because we're capped at 5, but we have a few more that we can share with you. But would love to hear from you. Which area is more interesting to you? What do you want to learn from when it comes to how semantic layers are being leveraged? And these are real world stories. We have some clients that have presented with us that we can share data on, but also some anonymized. A lot of this is also on our website, but on our webinar, we're going to get into details of the architecture and how it was built. So tell us what you want to hear more about, and we hope to see you on March 28th, I believe.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.